I want a click to your heart, a hyperlink to go inside you. Written by Stifled Laughter. Read by Eleanor Elizabeth. Summary. Shinsou, we have to talk about this. And Midoriya's voice was no longer excited, but waited, and Shinsou knew exactly why. You can't pretend that we weren't. Don't say it, said Shinsou, his face burning. Are you seriously going to ignore the fact, said Midoriya, his voice vulnerable and hopeful and tense all at the same time, that we were internet boyfriends for 2 years? As it had become habit, everyone headed down to the common room after classes on nights when they didn't have additional evening training. Depending on if people were feeling like actually studying, half-heartedly studying, or fully committed to just watching movies, various people filtered in or out. Shinsou and Midoriya were firmly in the half-hearted studying camp, as they theoretically had hero ethics papers spread out in front of them, but they were completely off the study guide topic as they discussed the possibilities of Shinsou's quirk when applied in different scenarios. I haven't gotten a chance to brainwash somebody into sleeping and then waking back up again, said Shinsou, and Midoriya nodded eagerly. I've managed to keep someone from going unconscious, but I think once they're unconscious, I can't go on. Right. This is great, said Midoriya. Wow, I wonder if you practiced enough? If you could... Sure, just let me find someone who's willing to be knocked out, woken up, and under brainwashed the whole time, said Shinsou, voice laced with amused sarcasm. But seeing Midoriya's thoughtful face, he realised that he probably shouldn't pitch such ideas to somebody who had absolutely no concept of self-preservation. This is great stuff. I don't get the chance to talk with people with non-physical quirks a lot, especially not mental ones like you, said Midoriya, eagerly writing some things down. Shinsou looked at him askance. You haven't talked to Sensei? Midoriya shrugged. Well, I already have a lot of info on him, to be honest, and he's kind of intimidating, so I haven't got around to asking much. I had this online friend in middle school who was really into Eraserhead and wrote all these cool meta-analysis posts on him, and a lot of them turned out to be right. So that's honestly where I got most of my Eraserhead info. Shinsou frowned, because surely there couldn't have been so many Eraserhead fans online. Maybe he'd known this guy. Really? Yeah, I was on Undernet, the fan community for underground heroes. Shinsou, who had been a top poster on that forum as a young teen, felt a weird mounting terror in his chest. And my friend was on here, he was super into Eraserhead, and he was the first one that pitched the idea that Eraserhead binding cloth wasn't part of his quirk, which turned out to be true, and Midoriya looked a bit sad. Yeah, we stopped talking after a while. I wonder if he'd had any new insights onto Eraserhead nowadays, given that Sensei's in the news a lot of the time now due to, well, everything. I think he would really like that guy, Shinsou. Midoriya shut up and blinked. Shinsou blinked back. Silence reigned for a moment, and then... Shinsou? Said Midoriya, his voice suddenly high-pitched. Shinsou, did you ever? Nope, said Shinsou, standing up abruptly and moving away from the couch. Nope. No, we are talking about this, said Midoriya, jumping up, a huge grin spreading over his face. This is so exciting. This isn't happening, yelped Shinsou, mildly panicked, scooting away towards the hall where his safe, Midoriya-less room was. It is you, gasped Midoriya, using a brief burst of his quirk to catch up with Shinsou, who, for the first time, desperately wished Ida was around to holler at them for using their quirk in the dorms. Cat got your tongue, right? Shh, hissed Shinsou, who had found his room and was beelining towards it with more speed than he'd ever surpassed in these halls, even when sprinting back seconds from curfew. No, we are not doing this. He fumbled for his keys, but his hands were shaking. How the hell was this happening? He felt Midoriya's hands grab his wrist. Shinsou doggedly stuck the key into the lock, missing it for the first few times, but managed to turn it. Shinsou, we have to talk about this. And Midoriya's voice was no longer excited, but waited. And Shinsou knew exactly why. You can't pretend that we weren't. Don't say it, said Shinsou, his face burning. Are you seriously going to ignore the fact, said Midoriya, his voice vulnerable and hopeful and tense all at the same time, that we were internet boyfriends for 2 years? Shinsou thought of all the things he told Midoriya online. The abuse he'd gone through in the various foster homes, his fantasies about being rescued and adopted by Eraserhead, his seemingly impossible dreams of becoming a hero, even the tiny, silly hopes that he had, like getting 2 cats when he grew up, and living in an apartment with big windows so he could see the sky whenever he wanted. The boy in front of him knew everything about him, except the things he swore to himself he'd tell Variant Key in person, like his quirk, and his dreams of going to UA. That's why, instead of actually thinking out the words he was going to say, Shinsou retreated into his worst self, his knee-jerk reaction of pushing people away. He darted inside his room, turned around, and blurted out, Look, it didn't mean anything, okay? Midoriya jerked his hand away, and Shinsou felt sick to his stomach, because what he had said was a fucking lie. But his voice failed him as he stared helplessly at the boy in front of him. Well, said Midoriya, his eyes narrowing with hurt and already glassy with tears. It meant something to me. With that, Midoriya slammed the door, wood creaking loudly under the sudden force. Shinsou felt that he probably deserved that. Shinsou had not logged into Undernet for a very long time, but the password for his account still worked, and once he was in, he saw a pile of notifications, as well as reminders that the threads that he had subscribed to had many updates. However, he ignored those in favour of clicking on his messages, where he had hundreds of lengthy message chat threads with variant key, aka Midoriya Izuku, it seemed. Even though Shinsou felt like utter crap, he still huffed out a small laugh at the memories of hitting a message amount limit with a thread and having to start another message, sometimes in the middle of a back and forth exchange. Reading the most recent ones would hurt too much, because he noticed that he had multiple unread messages from variant key, most likely asking where he'd gone, and if Shinsou knew Midoriya, he had probably overthought it and figured it was something he'd said to scare Shinsou off, and felt terrible about it when that wasn't why, not at all. Scrolling down, he saw a random message chain, dating about over 2 years ago. If Shinsou did the math right, they would have already been a bit into their relationship. Asshole, surprised Shinsou's brain helpfully. You know, the relationship that you just shot down in front of the guy that probably knows you best in the entire world, even if he doesn't know the person you became after it all ended. Feeling some sort of masochism for nostalgia, Shinsou clicked the message. Variant key. Hey, you down to roleplay more tonight? My mum said I could have the computer till 8. Cat got your tongue. Yeah, my foster parents are out till 8, so I can stay on. Variant key. Woo! Variant key. Anyway, what's up? I know that normal friends would ask about school, but for us, I'm just going to assume it sucked on either end. C. Yeah. My math teacher forgot to unlock my muzzle today, so I had to track her down to the teacher's lounge and ask. By the time that I found her, lunch was almost over, and I didn't bring food with me, so I didn't actually get to eat any lunch. So I still feel kind of crappy, even though I got her to unlock it after school and ate then. Still feel kind of weak, to be honest. Variant key. That sucks, Cat. I'm sorry. Wish you didn't have to deal with that. C. I mean, you get it. You have to deal with that shitty bully. C. Why the hell hasn't he been expelled yet? Variant key. Don't know. Variant key. It's complicated, I guess. Variant key. Anyhow, let's just jump into the roleplay thread? C. Sure. Let me go get some water and I'll be right there. It took some mental maths with the dates and sorting through the out-of-character threads versus the roleplay threads, but he found the same day on the RP thread eventually. Variant key. Okay, looks like we left off with you chasing the boss villain, Incisor, with a race ahead. All Might and I were trying to shut off the water filtration system before the poison got to the pipes. Want me to start? C. Sorry for the wait. It took me longer than I thought. One of my foster siblings couldn't reach the snacks in the fridge, so I had to help. Cursor being the tallest in the room when the adults are out. Variant key. Hold on, I just realised if your foster parents are out, who has the key so you can eat dinner? C. Can't eat till they get home. But I found out you can mash up silken tofu with a straw and drink it, so that's what I've got for now. Variant key. Cat, that's not real dinner. C. Not sure what else I can do. C. It's fine, seriously, I promise not to pass out while role-playing or anything. Variant key. When we meet IRL one day, we're going out somewhere cool to eat so you can actually get some food in you. C. Yeah, that'd be nice. C. And hey, at least I can put a straw through this thing, so I'm hydrated, so you don't have to worry about having a gross dehydrated boyfriend. V. A gross dehydrated boyfriend would still be cute. Shinsou slammed his forehead down on the desk, bit his hand, and screamed. It had been the bedrock of his sanity during these younger teen years, endless hours of talking on Undernet, and mostly to variant key. Shinsou had found out that the parent controls on the old laptop his foster mother had allowed him to use for homework were out of date, and thus weren't actually blocking any of the websites he most used. Undernet, the main forum for fans on the Underground Heroes, was one of the websites that had slipped under the radar of the blocks. Yes, Shinsou recognised the humour in that. It started out as a way to track where Eraserhead was. He was rarely out in Saitama, where Shinsou was usually housed, but on one occasion he'd been fostered in Tokyo and had gotten the chance to see Eraserhead doing patrol on the street outside his house. By googling how patrols usually worked, and how often he could expect to see Eraserhead come by, he'd found Undernet, and fallen headfirst into the pages of these threads. There were conspiracy forums, who the unnamed heroes were, what their quirks could be, and so on. Eraserhead was fairly well known within the underground community, and therefore Shinsou didn't spend a lot of time there. However, there were forums for the more known heroes. Ironic, given that in a grand sense the entire point of this forum was the lesser known heroes, and that's where Shinsou usually resided. And his favourite within those was the how-tos and science forum thread, where he met Variant Key. The username had come from a key speech by one of the world's leading quirk scientists, who had a theory that inside each person was a variant key, whatever it was in the genetics that made someone have a quirk or not. When Shinsou asked Variant Key why they'd chosen that name, Variant Key had been elusive, citing interest in quirk studies. Like many usernames, there were fairly random reason why you chose it, and it just sort of stuck years down the road. They'd started on the topic of how Eraserhead's binding cloths work, and had got so deep into the possible mechanics back and forth for hours that a mod had told them to take it to private messages, as they were clogging up the feed. From there, their talks expanded to other heroes, quirks in general, role-playing as sidekicks, and eventually their personal lives. Shinsou knew the obvious stranger danger talks. Don't tell them your name, where you live, or share anything that could identify you so that the 50-something-year-old man in the trench coat on the other end of the internet wire could track you down and harvest your kidneys. And for the first few months of their friendship, they both abided by those rules, until the tipping point happened, where Shinsou, in a haze of hunger and frustration, had typed, "I hate this fucking muzzle. I'm so hungry." And Variant Key, who was probably the smartest person Shinsou had ever met online or even in person, had figured out that Shinsou must have had some kind of voice quirk being restrained by the muzzle. When Variant Key, in response, shared that he was quirkless, Shinsou remembered the relief he felt that he wasn't the only one who had shared an intimate secret, even though he'd never gone into the specifics of his quirk. From there, it was hard to keep much else hidden. After all, those two facts alone painted a broad picture of how these two people were. So even though Shinsou had never known Variant Key's real name, he probably knew Shinsou better than anyone at that time. And if Shinsou had to be honest with himself, probably better than anyone currently, as he was still slowly opening up to the 1A class after his transfer. And he had just shoved away the person he felt like he was actually getting close to. Someone who wasn't at all afraid of his quirk and was as eager to become a hero as he was. Oh, and this person had been his internet boyfriend for 2 years. Shinsou, apparently in the mood not only to torture himself, but also drown in nostalgia, continued reading the roleplay thread. They often wrote about random missions that they imagined that for increasingly convoluted reasons, Eraserhead and All Might had to team up for, despite that the two of them had never actually been seen in the same place together according to the media. Shinsou recalled that Variant Key had shifted his character's quirk a few times in their early roleplays, but eventually settled on super strength, similar to All Might's. However, he gained the power from drawing energy from the ground and conducting it into his limbs. His character also had incredible designs for support item objects that made Shinsou often wonder if Variant Key wasn't already in some hero support course, given how complex they were. C. OOC. Okay, I'll start. Fade Out leaps off the building, following behind Eraserhead. He can see Incisor up ahead, his silver blades gleaming in the moonlight. "Conduit, I think he's headed your way," he says in the communicator. "You two done there yet?" V. "Stall him!" yells Conduit as he runs around the warehouse, desperately seeking the vat of poison that Incisor's cronies had said was located here. He takes out the tracer he designed and waves it around, hoping to catch the unusual particles in the air. It bleeps twice as he aims it closer to a pile of abandoned air conditioners. The place is covered in trash. He wouldn't be able to dig it out himself. "All Might, be careful," he says as he points towards the pile. "The vat of poison is in there." C. "Let's cut him off," says Fade Out to Eraserhead, who nods and speeds ahead, landing well ahead of Incisor and blocking his path down the alley. Fade Out sees his chance, a manhole cover a few feet ahead of Incisor. Waiting until Incisor's foot is right above it, Fade Out then seizes the perfect opportunity and snaps his fingers and activates Vanish, causing the cover to disappear and Incisor to trip into it, blades clanging loudly as she falls. And the thread continued on. Of course, they saved the day, secured the water filtration centre, arrested Incisor, she was carted off to prison, and Fade Out and Conduit thanked their mentors as they parted ways. Everything neatly timed up, hands clean. Very unlike what Shinsou had learnt was the way that heroes actually worked. Based on what he'd learnt so far with Eraserhead, they'd be all tied up with paperwork at the police station and All Might's agency for a while after. But here, it was clean-cut, simple, and fun to play, because that was what they were doing, playing as heroes. V. OOC. I feel like after this, realistically, I would go home and sleep, but in this world, I have money and can eat out, so... ... Do you want to go to that izakaya that's open late near home? Asked Conduit. They've got pretty good katsudan there. C. OOC. Oh god, what I wouldn't give for katsudan right now. Sounds good to me, says Fade Out, holding out his hand to Conduit as they turn down the street. V. You were really cool today, says Conduit. That was really quick thinking, vanishing the manhole. C. Well, we would have been toast if you hadn't figured out where the poison was, says Fade Out. All Might even said so. V. OOC. I think I'd die on the spot if All Might ever gave me a compliment. C. OOC. Yeah, same if Eraserhead ever said anything nice about me, I'd probably burst into flames. Shinsou snorted. He definitely had been a mess when Eraserhead first started mentoring him, although there weren't a ton of compliments to be had. He got tangled up in the binding cloth more than not, and the one thing that he could do well, his quirk, they barely worked on. But just last week, he'd managed to wrangle a good job out of his mentor and had only screeched into his pillow about it when he got home to his room 2 hours later, which was a vast improvement over the combustion he had expected. V. Taking Fideout's hand, Conduit leans forward and kisses his boyfriend, smiling. We have tomorrow off. Do you want to do something? C. Fideout kisses Conduit back, squeezing his hand. I don't care what we do, as long as it's with you. Okay. Bursting into flames was still an option, apparently, because Shinsou's cheeks definitely felt like it. He put his face in his hands and tried to breathe regularly, but tears pricked the edges of his eyes at seeing the affection in the old words on the screen. He could remember what he was doing when he read them, how he was hunched over in his chair, feeling small and gangly at the same time, ugly and muzzled and angry, but not when he was talking to Variant Key. When he was talking to Variant Key, he was his perfect self. The only memories he had worth remembering before attending UA were contained in those grey pixels on the black background. There was something about the dating they did over text that felt safe. Safer than any in-person interaction he'd ever had. While, in theory, the reason could have been that he could log off and run away from the exchange if he wanted, he never felt that was needed when it was Variant Key on the other end. No, what made him feel safe was that no matter what he typed, Variant Key would respond in kind, or at least with some level of understanding. No matter how shitty things were in the real world, Shinsou had always been at home in their messages. In the next few hours, he lost himself in their exchanges. Threads that took months to write were consumed in less than 20 minutes. He felt like he was tumbling down a dark and deep hole, with flashes of painful memory snaking around the bright and colourful ones that he'd held on to as a teen. He went back, way back, in one of their personal threads, not even a roleplay thread, amazed at how slowly the two of them had opened up to each other, well before they'd started dating. V. I guess at some point you'll figure it out from how I write about having a quirk, in that I don't really know what it's like, so yeah, I'm quirkless. C. I'm about to say something super awful, but C. I really wish I was. V. I'm sure your quirk is great. C. No, it really isn't. C. I hate it, honestly. It's fucked up. I don't think anyone should have it. V. Well, are you out there doing villain stuff? V. Sorry, that could come off as accusatory over text. That was rhetorical. You're clearly not. You want to be a hero, so couldn't a power like yours be good in the right hands? Any quirk can be used for good. C. I really don't think so. Not this one. Jesus, how selfish was Shinsou back then, admitting he wished he was quirkless to someone who was quirkless and just admitted that in a state of vulnerability. If Shinsou could find himself at that time and slap him over the head a few times for good measure, he'd do it. He wondered if there was somebody with a quirk for that. They'd get a lot of mileage out of this whole conversation. It was all so maudlin and introspective in a way that was not at all useful. He'd done a lot more thinking about his quirk since then, and while it was still a work in progress, he was leagues above the denial and self-loathing he'd felt about it as a young teen. V. But you still want to be a hero, right? C. Of course I do. C. I just need to find a way to be a hero without using my quirk. And since my theory is that Eraserhead's quirk has nothing to do with his ropes, at least I think they're ropes, he's a hero I want to be like. V. Or have as a dad. C. Way to throw something I told you about in the vulnerable dark of night back in my face. V. I think you told me that at like 2:30 p.m. on a Sunday. I remember because you said your foster parents were gone for the weekend, so we got to spend 12 hours designing our hero costumes. C. 12 hours very well spent. V. Yeah, I mean, the hair's ears look cool on me, but I think having them up full time would make me super obvious. C. Bunny, not hair. V. Hairs are cooler and faster and tougher. C. Cute little bunny ears. V. I am not cute. C. I don't know. You sound pretty cute. It's not like he knew if Variant Key was actually cute or not. That wasn't the point. Shinsou had felt bold and felt some sort of connection, this tether, to Variant Key, and went for it. If he was bold enough to tell someone that their theory that maybe Eraserhead's robes and eyes used the same quirk was dead wrong, then he could tell a fellow undernet user that he'd gotten close to that he was cute. Where had young Shinsou got that boost of confidence? Shinsou checked the timestamp and racked his brain. It was fairly early on his time in Undernet, it seemed. He remembered those times during the first summer he'd really been on Undernet. Everything was new and interesting. He was still back reading through threads and scoffing at people who said Eraserhead clearly had a telekinesis quirk. He'd seen the ropes in action. For a second, as Eraserhead patrolled through his neighbourhood in Tokyo. His eyes weren't glowing the way people said they did sometimes, so surely they had to be separate. If it had nothing to do with his quirk, then it must mean he got some of his strength as a hero from just himself. And that meant maybe Shinsou could one day too. So he dove into the forums with gusto, reading and arguing and role-playing and having the time of his life. He'd never felt so free. Even when the box fan broke and sweat dripped down his muzzle and rubbed his jaw raw, he focused on the computer, only pausing to run to the neighbours so they could unlock him for a quick bite to eat and running back if his foster parents were out. He could, whilst debating the merits of speed versus strength in a close combat fight, forget that he was so very alone. It didn't feel alone when people responded to his messages. He never felt more wanted than when someone referenced him by handle name in regards to one of his theories. So this thread, it must have been during summer vacation. His foster parents had probably been out of town and his foster siblings in summer camps, because he was not allowed to go to the camp lest he enslave all of their children and lead them marching upon Tokyo to conquer it. He was required to stay at home. It would have been absolutely miserable had Variant Key's mother not sprained her ankle that summer and had to stay home, meaning Variant Key needed to be nearby to watch her. How odd to think that he now knew what Variant Key's mother looked like. In his mind, when he was younger, she was similar to the nice woman he saw scanning groceries at the supermarkets, a little short, kind-looking, and mercilessly efficient. He wasn't sure where he got that image from, but it's what stuck. But now, having seen her pick up Midoriya during breaks, and occasionally in the halls during parent-teacher conference times, he now knew what she looked like, which was honestly just a female version of Midoriya. Still kind and short, but given what he'd once overheard her say in regards to concern about Midoriya's health, also had a spine of steel. But back then, Variant Key's mother had just been this vague, general idea of what a mum would look like. And from what Variant Key had told him, she sounded kind, if a bit overprotective, but still a good mum. Variant Key had never mentioned a dad. That at least was something young Shinsou was emotionally aware enough to avoid asking about. Shinsou clicked away from the thread, knowing that it just dissolved into awkward teenage banter. He could see it now in his mind's eye, young Midoriya screeching at his computer, hands on his face, as he read that his friend had called him cute. Instead, he clicked on another message. A few months later, one of their roleplay threads. It looked like they'd just finished a roleplay, but they were still in the thread. So they'd tagged their messages as out of character to show the divide. Shinsou smiled, wanly, in a fond way, at how organised they'd been about the whole thing. The date was March 26th, and if he had the year right, this was C. OOC. And that was some really cool science you did there. Mixing nitroglycerin with the chemicals from Dr. Ferrio's lab? Genius. C. How did you know all that chemistry stuff? I don't think we've gotten there in any of my science classes. V. OOC. I know someone with a quirk that involves it? V. That stuff is nasty when it's in your face, that's for sure. C. Hold on. Is this from that shitty bully that landed you in the ER? V. Yeah, I thought things were getting better, but I accidentally answered a question in class that he wanted to answer, and, well, he wasn't happy after school about it. I guess it was on my mind because of that. C. And of course the teachers will never do anything about bullying. God, that sucks. C. I know you're not going to believe it, but if I were there, I could have stopped it. V. That's nice of you to say, but not him. He says he'll be a hero one day, and he's pretty strong already. His quirk's one of the best I've ever researched, but I appreciate the thought. C. Weren't you telling me that any quirk can be used for good? Sounds like he isn't using it for that. So I just don't trust him to actually become a hero one day. V. It's tough, but really, it's nice of you to say that you would have stopped it. C. I wouldn't want to use my quirk normally, but I know I would if it would help you. Again, Shinsou had to nearly scream in mortification. This wasn't a faceless, friend-shaped voice that young Shinsou had been talking to. It was Midoriya, the guy who kicked his ass in the sports festival, the guy with an unbelievable drive and even more unbelievable quirk. Wait, hadn't Midoriya said he was quirkless in his messages before? But then his eyes skipped to the next line, and his breath caught in his throat as he promptly disregarded that thought. Even though he'd known the words well, he'd read over them time and time again when the nights got rough. He screenshotted them and, in an insane feat of daring, ducked into the school library to print them off under the guise of printing himself a picture for a school presentation. V. That's the kind of attitude that makes you a hero, Cat. That you'd want to use your quirk to help someone else, even if you don't like it yourself. V. I can tell you're going to make it. You're going to be a great hero. I know you are. Shinsou distinctly remembers tearing up at the screen and hastily wiping away the snot trickling down out of his muzzle and onto his chin. He'd had to go run his face under cold water and get back to some semblance of normal. But he didn't want to leave the chat unresponded to, so he just replied, "See, that means a lot to me, really. I don't even have the words for it. See, BRB, gotta take care of something." He remembers stumbling to the bathroom, coughing as the tears and snot had run down his face. How ungainly and not at all hero-like. He was a mess. But he remembered looking in the mirror and for the first time really, really believing he could do it. The tears were overwhelming in joy, and a little in shock. Someone genuinely believed he could do it. That night, after he logged off talking to Variant Key, he had begun to study for the UA entrance exam. It was years away, but he'd need all the help he can get. And now he had that push, he needed to believe in himself. The date had stuck in Shinsou's mind. Even years later, he remembered March 26th. When the day passed, he had thought of Variant Key. He felt the brief pang of regret that things had ended inconclusively between them, but also that thrill that he had done it. He was here, and Variant Key had been the push that made him feel like he could actually do it. The printed-off screenshot had gotten ripped in the many moves between foster homes that Shinsou had gone through, so at one point he just laminated it himself with packing tape and tucked it away, in his folder of important documents, like his school documents and his birth certificate. He hadn't taken it out to look at since he'd moved into the dorms, but the day after the joint training session, he'd taken it out with shaky hands, wishing he could tell Variant Key that he'd done it. He supposed now it didn't matter. Variant Key knew. Variant Key was probably sitting in his room furious at Cat Got Your Tongue. Except for they weren't those people anymore. They were Midoriya Izuku, prospective hero named Deku, furious at Shinzo Hitoshi, prospective hero named Sphinx. And it would take a lot to rescue the friendship from where Shinsou had left it to die, unwatered and unresponded to. He had to move away from the message. There was too much there to handle. He looked for another one for a few months later, one that Shinsou remembers seared into his brain as well. V. Had a really weird day at school. C. Want to talk about it, or do something else? I think there's some All Might blogs that updated if you want to talk about those. V. No, actually, I think I want to talk about this. It's kind of weird, but someone in my class came out. It was kind of by accident, and everyone's treating them like super weird for it. I didn't even know how to respond, because usually it's me getting bullied, and they just turned on him about it. C. Oh, that's... wow, a lot. C. What did you do? How did you react? God, how obvious was Shinsou here, asking if Variant Key had done anything when a male classmate had come out. Shinsou had figured out that he was into guys only earlier that year, and had written it off as an impossibility to actually ever be with anyone, so it didn't really matter, but it did matter what Variant Key thought of gay people. It shouldn't. People were shitty. He'd come to expect that. But the fact was, it did matter. Shinsou could tell by the flutter of his heart and the stinging feeling in his stomach as he typed those words. V. I tried to talk to him after class and ask if he was okay, but he brushed me off and ran away. Maybe I'll try again tomorrow. It just really sucks, you know? The thought process behind the next text was so clear in Shinsou's memory. Okay, that sounded like Variant Key was okay with gay people, but also could just be a seemingly kind guy who was secretly incredibly homophobic, and that's why he said it sucks, because the guy was gay, which prompted this message. C. Sucks that he got bullied, you mean, right? V. Yeah? V. Oh god, you didn't think I mean that it sucks that he's gay? V. No. V. I think people like who they like, you know? It's not like anyone can control it or anything. V. Not that you need to control it, even if you could choose or whatever. It's fine, like, yeah. V. I'm rambling. I think people should just mind their own business, if it's two guys that like each other, or two girls, or other stuff. C. Yeah, I agree. C. Hope that guy's okay. V. I'll try again tomorrow. V. Kind of stressed talking about it, actually. Let's see what's going on in the science forums. C. Okay, see you over there. And that was that. Shinsou remembered having to get up and walk around the room after that. It's not like Variant Key had said he was gay or bisexual or whatever, but hearing that he was okay with it had thrown Shinsou so far off his equilibrium that he couldn't sit still. Masochism knows no bounds, and he was already in it, so with white-knuckled fingers he clicked on a thread that he'd read so many times it seemed almost useless to bother reading it. Why do so when he could still, years later, quote it? It was dated a few months after the one he'd just read. Another date that was seared into his mind from his time on Undernet with Variant Key. V. You got a sec? C. Yeah, I've got the whole evening. It's parent-teacher night for my foster sister's school. V. Okay, cool. So, feel free to tell me I'm crazy, but... C. Okay. C. So it says that you've been typing for 2 minutes. Should I be nervous? V. Sorry, I should have typed this out beforehand in a Word document or something. V. Okay, so I've been doing a lot of thinking, and I've been psyching myself up for weeks to say this, and I don't know if you want to talk to me ever again after this, just let me know at least. Then that'll be okay. Well, not really, but better than if you never said anything. V. I guess I want to know, like, when we talk sometimes, I wonder, like... V. Have you been flirting with me? Shinsou's stomach curled reading the words again, much like when he'd first read them all those years ago, but now for an entirely different reason. Back then it had been elation and adrenaline shooting through his body, lighting up his core and making him tremble at the keyboard. Now it was twisted with guilt because he knew how this story ended. No, you don't actually, thought the rational part of Shinsou's mind, the one that had gotten him this far in life. Variant Key is sitting in the dorm room next to yours, and you could talk to him about this and apologise for being a piece of shit. But Shinsou didn't get up to do that. He kept reading, ensnared in the web of emotions that had kept him together throughout the roughest part of his teen years, and the person that had spun it. C. Yeah. C. Did I make you uncomfortable? V. No! V. No, I wanted to talk to you about, like... V. I think I'm reading the mood right, so here goes. V. Do you like me in that way? Is that what the flirting means? I don't even know if you're into guys or whatever, but that's the feeling I've gotten as we've talked, and it makes me really happy when you flirt with me, and I feel like you get me in ways that no one else does, even though we don't know the really basic stuff about each other, like our real names or schools or whatever, but that doesn't seem important when we know so much else. I think it means more to me that we don't know that stuff about each other, but we still talk all the time. So, yeah, I like you. Do you feel the same? Shinsou remembered how he had been so dumbfounded by how Variant Key had just come out and just said it. His bravery that he tried to put in his role plays was evident in how he spoke so plainly about the things that actually mattered, outside of the worlds that they had designed. Yeah, he'd had a huge crush on his roleplay partner. How could he not? Variant Key was so smart and so kind when Shinsou's issues slowly leaked out into their conversations. And so the flirting had come out, slowly at first, until eventually he'd built up a casual rapport with Variant Key that integrated the flirting in normally. But if he had put it out there, what did Variant Key expect to happen next? Become boyfriends? Meet up in person? Variant Key clearly saw Shinsou as Cat Got Your Tongue, who was Shinsou as his cleverest and most put-together self. But even then, he'd gotten vulnerable and spilled his secrets to Variant Key. So while some of the ugliest parts of Shinsou had been on display, there was also so much more underneath. The simmering resentment against society that valued physical quirks above all else, and that sad, desperate part of him that feared that he couldn't actually cut it as a hero if he even got that far. But opening up to Variant Key had worked so far, somehow to get him to, extraordinarily, have some sort of feelings for Cat Got Your Tongue. So trembling hands on the keyboard, Shinsou had typed. C. I do, but before you say anything else, you need to know that I'm, like, really messed up. I don't know if I'd be any good in any sort of relationship. Never had he refreshed the message page so much. Every second he was hitting that F5, waiting for a new message to appear, wondering if he had been presumptuous. Maybe Variant Key just wanted to acknowledge the status between us, but not actually do anything about it? But Variant Key was kind. If anything, he was the kindest person Shinsou had ever known, and hopefully he'd at least let Shinsou down gently. V. That's okay. I don't want to push you into anything. I just wanted to know, since I felt like I was going crazy trying to figure it out. It's hard to tell over the internet. If you just want to be friends, then I get it. V. I don't even know what relationships over the internet look like anyway. I mean, I could guess, but from the brief snippets of online relationships Shinsou had witnessed, he wasn't sure he wanted to be part of something like that anyway. Not the kind of role-playing he was interested in right now. He wasn't even sure what that was really about, beyond the basics he'd learnt in health class, so that wasn't even on his radar. So without that, or going on dates in person, what could they even have? C. What did you want to happen after I said I liked you back? V. Oh, I don't even really know. V. I didn't think I'd get this far. Shinsou had laughed then, as much as his muzzle allowed, because they both were truly flying blind at this. It at least felt okay if they both sucked at figuring out what to do next. V. Do you want to just keep going how we used to? I didn't want to make anything awkward. I just wanted to know. C. Yeah, that sounds great. C. Did you see that article about the new All Might movie coming out? It's got some retired heroes acting in it. And so the rest of the evening went like normal. Reading through, it didn't appear like they'd role-played at all that night, and had instead gone into depth about the speculation of what it might mean for the next All Might movie if they were returning heroes. In fact, the only thing that showed anything had changed was at the end of the night, the following exchange occurred. C. Gotta run, heard the car pull into the driveway. V. Night. V. Thanks for talking to me earlier about stuff. C. Thanks for telling me. C. Night. And Shinsou distinctly remembered shutting the computer and scuttling to the kitchen, hoping to find at least one of the parents was in a good enough mood to remove his muzzle so he could eat the leftovers he'd been eyeing in the fridge. And they had been, so he rejoiced with eating whatever the hell had been in there. He remembered going to bed, curling up underneath the blanket and thinking to himself, oh god, oh fuck, he likes me, oh god, oh fuck, on repeat until he was dragged, sometime around 2 a.m. probably, to sleep. School the next day, if Shinsou recalled right, had been awful because he was exhausted and kept replaying the conversation over and over in his mind. And given how sometimes Variant Key's mother needed him for the evening, or he had to study, or whatever reasons, Variant Key wasn't always available to chat, even if just to send an asynchronous message. But Shinsou didn't have anywhere else to go. He wasn't really allowed to go anywhere else, really, after school, so he had to be in his room, on his computer, staring hopefully at the screen, in between working on his homework and occasionally drawing for fun. The only time he was truly away from the computer was when his foster siblings were out and he got to use the bike, but that wasn't frequent enough for him to work around when chatting with Variant Key. But Variant Key had logged on that night, and they had continued with their usual chats and roleplays, talking about ideas for changing their characters and continuing their ongoing story that they'd had for years. They were in the middle of a chat about making an alternate universe for their characters. Variant Key couldn't decide if his character was going to sidekick with someone other than All Might for a while to get more experience, or if he would stick with All Might since Variant Key admitted that was his dream since forever, when Shinsou felt the urge to ask a question that had been clawing at the back of his head all day. V. Maybe Conduit would benefit from working under Endeavour. I know he's got some incredible power distribution management. That would be fascinating to work with, especially given Conduit's strength, quirk, power issues. V. Sorry, I'm rambling over here. C. No, that's okay. I like your rambling. It's cute. Ugh, was that too intimate? Could he still flirt? Was that leading Variant Key on? Was that a shitty thing to do? But if he stopped, maybe Variant Key would be sad to see the change in their dynamic. If he liked Shinsou, wasn't it obvious that he wanted the way they were before to continue? V. Haha, okay, thanks for listening. C. Hey, I was wondering about something. C. And I'll just be really open and honest about it because I don't want this to be misinterpreted, but is it okay if I keep flirting with you? C. I don't want you to feel uncomfortable. V. No, it's okay, even if we aren't a thing. I think it's nice. I don't get attention like this anywhere else, really. Shinsou remembered having breathed out a sigh of relief at that. There were some ethical quandaries about it, he was sure, but they seemed a little overcomplicated for his current state of mind, and if Variant Key said he was happy about it, well, it's not like he could read body language or anything. All he had was text on the page. The next few weeks had passed fairly smoothly. Whenever Shinsou encountered issues in school or had a particularly miserable day in the muzzle, he zoned out, daydreaming about the encounters he had been role-playing with Variant Key. If it was a really rough day, like when he hadn't been able to sleep due to a massive headache, he planned out endless scenarios for them to roleplay, getting stuck in an alternate dimension with only their wits to get them out, being thrown back in time, fighting their own doubles. Every time it ended with them surviving and beating the odds, every time they did it together. And sometimes, in those daydreams, he would flirt with Conduit a little bit more, throw an arm around his shoulder when the day was over and they went back to their agency. Close, friendly. Maybe even fall asleep on the couches together after a long day of fighting criminals. The Shinsou of now couldn't help but feel annoyed and fond at the younger self idealising working yourself so hard that you pass out, when in reality it was a lot less charming. Things that could be just friendly, but when Shinsou was lonely and sad and aching, he couldn't convince himself it was entirely that. Because sometimes in those fantasies, he would reach for Conduit's hand, and sometimes Conduit would say things that were out of character. Things that technically Variant Key would be saying, like what a great hero he would be one day, or that he liked the flirting. It was probably meaningful, and Shinsou figured he should pay attention to that. But if he did that, they'd have to cross that gulf. Somewhere from where they'd just left friendship behind, and now hovered in the flirting without purpose. And what lay beyond that, Shinsou couldn't pass out. And then, of course, it all came together, hitting him like a train. It was weird how it happened, but apparently when you're role-playing an interrogation scene and your role-playing chemistry is on fire, and you're shooting messages back and forth at lightning speed, guiding the roleplay exactly where you thought it would go, well, you get this sort of zen and high that makes you really bold and alive. And that leads to decisions being made. Cat got your tongue. Fade Out leans on the table, twirling one of his knives in his hands. Now, Sharksaw, I see you've got two options. Either you tell us where the hideout is, or I vanish you into the prison below your chair and you don't see the sun for a very long time. Considering your fellows have already sold you out, I think your choice is obvious. Variant Key. Conduit, like usual, is sitting on the ground with his hands pressed down to gather up power for the next battle. He's keeping an eye on the door, wondering if the blatant lie about Sharksaw's fellow Yakuza abandoning him would come back to bite them. He hopes Fade Out's bluff will hold long enough to get what they need out of Sharksaw. Shinsou remembered being pleased that they'd left an avenue open that someone might rescue Sharksaw, because that gave an excuse to type another fight scene. Variant Key knew that Cat Got Your Tongue loved typing out fight scenes, because he got to show off cool terms for acrobatics that he'd learned after watching a few Eraserhead fight videos closely and looking at what the moves were called after. See, Sharksaw grits his teeth, the blood from the cut under his eye welling up and threatening to drip into his mouth. Fade Out dramatically raises his hand and snaps his fingers, vanishing it away. Sharksaw's eyes dart to Fade Out's hand, then down below to his chair. V. Fine, says Sharksaw. He looks cowed, and Conduit feels relief that they might get this out of the way before anyone comes to rescue him. It's at the warehouse, by the East Tokyo docks. And of course, that's when they hear shouting down the hall. And Sharksaw looks panicked, having spilt the info right before something happened, and he yanks his chair forward as both Conduit and Fade Out are distracted. See. Fade Out lunges and shoves it back down, snapping his fingers and vanishing a section of the floor below Sharksaw, which sends him down to the cell below. Let's go, he says to Conduit, and they leave the room. The action fight scene was intense as shit. It felt like Shinsou was flying as he typed it. The adrenaline coursing through his veins might as well have been from physical action as it was from the thrill of a well-done exchange with Variant Key. And he could tell Variant Key was having an excellent time too, given how much he was typing about the angles and precision and the energy flow as he kicked absolute bad guy ass, took down the operation at the warehouse, and then debriefed after in their non-roleplay chat thread. V. That was so cool. Oh man, I have so many more ideas for how Conduit could use water vibrations to do energy transfer. I think we could get some really epic battles if I work out built-up tsunami power transfer. C. Totally. Or volcanoes, imagine the energy transfer of a volcano. V. Man, I think we roleplay through dinner. I don't even care. You could have pulled me away from that keyboard with wolves, I swear. Shinsou had laughed at that. He remembered the excitement and joy running through him like a drug. And that's when it had hit him, clean and square in the face. He was just as thrilled to be Cat Got Your Tongue with Variant Key as he was thrilled to be Fade Out fighting bad guys with Conduit. Because it was Variant Key, the guy that talked to him about how he'd gone to see the new All Might biopic 4 times in theatre in 1 week and collected all the limited editions cards from it. He was just as attractive to him as the concept of a clever and brave energy transfer hero conduit who used science and smarts to outwit everyone around him. They say that adrenaline makes you forget you're in pain. And if that's what this was, then Shinsou had wanted to feel that way all the time. So, in a burst of hope and positivity that he rarely felt, he typed, "Cat got your tongue. About the thing that we aren't doing? See. What if we did? See. What if we were boyfriends?" The full minute in between him sending the message and receiving one back was agonising, but so worth it. Variant Key. For real? You'd want that with me? V. I mean, you know I do, but I want to make sure. V. Like, V. I don't even know what that looks like, but V. I could do that with you, whatever it is. V. But only if you really want to. Don't feel pressured because I want to do something. Shinsou had felt pressured and exhausted by a lot in his life. He had felt trapped beyond belief, clawing his way towards something better, but in millimetres, so it was painful and slow. But that faded away, or at least felt soothed by Variant Key in his life. C. I don't know what that would look like, but C. Do you want to find out together? V. Yeah. V. Yeah, I really do. There were a few seconds of nothing, and Shinsou grinned, because he knew. C. Are you researching how to have an internet boyfriend? V. Maybe. Shinsou laughed, as much as he could, and rode that high for the rest of the night until he was forced off the computer by his foster mother needing to make a phone call, the curse of dial-up, and went to bed. That night, he shamelessly pictured Fade Out and Conduit holding hands, maybe even leaning into each other, maybe even kissing, maybe. Reading the exchange of how they got together, Shinsou had to push himself away from his computer, curl up on his bed, and scream into the pillow for a while. Aizawa was going to get on his ass for wrapping up his voice, but if there was ever a time to scream, it was now. What a goddamn idiot he'd been. An absolute jerk to someone who'd been nothing but kind and understanding to someone as finicky and weird as Cat Got Your Tongue had been. And then he'd blown it all up by being an awkward and cowardly person fleeing someone who at least deserved to know what happened. He felt sick, wretched, and honestly he deserved it. And at the core of it was the thought that Variant Key had been a good boyfriend, and if they'd been in person, he probably would have been an incredible one. His lip trembled and his throat choked up, eyes and nose stinging with held-back tears. Fuck! He'd done so well at pushing back the feelings he'd had for Variant Key since they'd stopped talking. Well, he'd stopped talking. Damn it! He really owed Midoriya an explanation. Shinsou crawled out of bed and back to the computer. The page still open, he scrolled up to the most recently sent messages, braced himself, and began to read. V. Hey, it's been a few days. Are you okay? V. Okay, I'm starting to get worried. It's been a week. V. You haven't posted at all in 3 weeks, Kat. I don't know if you're even logging on anymore. V. Is this about the thing I said? Did it freak you out? I'm really sorry. V. Probably was. Well, whatever it was, I'm sorry. Can I at least say I'm sorry to you? V. You probably aren't even reading these and I'm still sending messages months later. I know it's pathetic, but all I've ever known is how to keep writing and trying to understand. V. I keep telling myself it had to be me because I don't want to think something bad happened to you. I'd rather you be angry at me forever than dead. V. I almost bought a train ticket to Satima today. I wouldn't even know where to start looking, but at least I could say I tried. V. I have some super exciting news I want to tell you, but I can't because you're not here. I think you would have been excited for me though. At least the you who I knew would have been. I don't think I'd know who you are anymore. And I've changed so much you probably wouldn't know me. V. We'd probably still be friends, the people we've become though. So, I don't know. I hope we meet again someday. Shinsou wondered if he was about to tank the only solid friendship he had so far in 1A. Well, honestly, he probably already had, so nothing to lose here. He typed his question, inhaled sharply, and slammed the enter key. Cat got your tongue. Well, do you want to meet in my room after dinner? If Midoriya had to wait for Shinsou for well over a year, then it was only fair play that Shinsou spent the next 2 hours alternating between trying to do homework and whipping his head up to stare at the internet page, hoping for a message notification. It was extremely reminiscent of his days when he was younger, except for now he could stress shove rice crackers into his mouth to distract himself, which was only partially effective. So when Shinsou had finished a page of his art history reading and glanced up at the computer, he nearly threw the book across the room as he clambered to his laptop, heart in his throat, as he clicked on the updated message thread. Variant key. See you at 7.